Good evening, everyone. But I just wanted to say on behalf of the Columbus Women's Commission, thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks to the Gateway Film Center for the generous hospitality of hosting us. And we'd like to thank our partners, the Black Ohio Film Group and Legal Aid of Southeast and Central Ohio. This event is only possible with your support, so thank you. Thank you as well to each of our panelists for taking the time to join us in this crucial community conversation, and to former Columbus Women's Commissioner Liz Brown for moderating tonight's panel. That will be, as you can tell, after the film. Finally, once again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here and being part of the community to focus on this important issue. Our city, like many across the nation, is grappling with the challenges of evictions and housing instability. In the past year alone, Columbus saw more than 23,000 eviction filings. We know the importance of stable housing for families, a roof over your head, a place to sleep. This is a basic need for all people. And the reverse is heartbreakingly true. When a family loses stable housing, everything is thrown into chaos. How did the parents get to work? Where would the children go to school? Evictions have numerous cascading effects: increased homelessness, worsening health outcomes, and deepening financial hardship. We see more interactions with homeless services, increased hospital and mental health visits, and a decline in employment, earnings, and access to credit. This is not the foundation for a thriving city. When I first formed the Columbus Women's Commission 8 years ago, we named housing as a key area to focus our efforts. We talked to housing partners to understand the landscape and with residents to learn about their lived experiences. We sat in eviction court to witness the eviction process firsthand. What we saw in eviction court moved us in many ways. We saw women being evicted. We saw single mothers with children in strollers being evicted. We saw women in their 70s being evicted. And most of these women were women of color. Evictions in our community and across the nation show the racial and gender inequities present around us. This conversation today is more timely and important than ever. The Women's Commission brings partners to the table. From the beginning, the Commission has convened conversations and developed partnerships to build upon existing work in our community and help identify where we can affect change for women and where we can affect policy that impacts women's lives. And that's exactly what we're doing here tonight. Tonight's film screening and panel discussion is the culmination of both new and long-lasting partnerships, a vision for a better Columbus, and the work of those who came before us. We are here because the work is far from finished. The Detroit women featured in this film tonight we are going to watch exemplify bravery as they fight against housing instability perpetuated by predatory lending and modern-day redlining. It is my hope that we learn from their example and draw inspiration from their ambition to make change in our own city. These conversations are not always easy, but sometimes the most difficult conversations to have are the ones that are of utmost importance. The topics discussed in this film are heavy and sometimes difficult to process and absorb. This conversation is important, and so is your well-being. If at any time you need to step out, please feel free to do so. And now, without further ado, here is the film, Locked Out.
Homeownership is the easiest way to build wealth in America. Homeownership is the American dream.
You cannot have a healthy life if you don't have stable and safe housing.
The best thing was to do was just buy a house. Everything else gonna fall into place.
The system is set up to create barriers, especially for people of color.
We really want to be homeowners. What do we do?
Redlining is not something that happened decades ago. Redlining still has consequences right now.
So many scams going on.
We don't have nowhere to look to get help without it being some kind of scam.
A land contract's kind of like a mortgage, except you get all of the responsibility of homeownership, but none of the equity.
I wish I would have read it thoroughly, because it's as is.
My front porch was caving in. The roof was caving in.
The tub can come through at any given time.
Yeah. The mental stress, the emotional, the financial, all of it at one time.
There's a lot of people that end up in the bad contracts, only to find out if there is one thing done wrong, they rip the house out from under them.
To finally get the eviction notice, it was heartbreaking. It's so overwhelming.
They're scared. They don't know what's next.
Black women are more likely to be evicted than any other group of people. Black men are locked up and Black women are locked out of their housing.
Right now, illegal eviction just happened. We have a serious situation. The homes are now in foreclosure.
Single Black moms are leading the fight for housing justice because we've been the underdog for so long. Nothing was given to us.
I am the infrastructure of this city.
These issues that are in Detroit are active in every city across the country.
This home belongs to my sons. Our legacy is here. This is where I was born.
We need a clear roadmap to home ownership.
Tonight's panel. Elizabeth Brown became president and CEO of the YWCA Columbus in January of 2023. Previously, she served 7 years as president pro tempore on Columbus City Council, fighting for broad-based economic prosperity, gender equity, and racial justice. She was also the executive director of the Ohio Women's Public Policy Network, a statewide collective impact project to improve women's economic security through public policy. During her years on council, she spearheaded laws to protect reproductive health care, provide paid family leave, connect pregnant women with housing and medical care, defend residents against threats of deportation, support low-income families through COVID disruptions, erase medical debt, and increase access to early childhood education opportunities. Wow. Wow, that's amazing. She also commissioned an overhaul of tax incentive policies, which resulted in the city's first affordable housing and living wage requirements. She has prior professional experience in economic development, nonprofit service, and state government. Originally born in Berwick, the Berwick neighborhood of Columbus, Elizabeth was raised in Granville and is a proud public schools graduate and magna cum laude graduate of Columbia University. She and her husband, Patrick, live in Columbus along with their 3 children, Carolyn, Russell, and Maribel. Please give a warm welcome to Liz Brown.
Well, hello, thank you. I'm really happy to be here to be moderating what's going to be a powerful conversation after a really, really powerful film. And I will just briefly tell you that the lens that I'm always looking through now is that of a huge pillar of YWCA's work, which is homelessness and housing. Last year, we served 750 individuals who are experiencing homelessness, at some phase of experiencing homelessness. And so I'm really, really honored to be in the company of our panelists tonight. I would like to first start by introducing Mayor Andrew Ginther. Mayor Ginther is serving his 3rd term as the 53rd mayor of the city of Columbus, Ohio. He doesn't need much of an introduction because we all know him. But I will say that Mayor Ginther is uniquely committed to equity in all of his work to address Columbus's most pressing problems, whether that's infant mortality, early childhood education, or affordable housing efforts. And his most significant accomplishment, he is married to Shannon Ginther. And as you know, First Lady Ginther convened, along with the mayor, the Columbus Women's Commission in Mayor Ginther's 1st term, and they have stood by that work to elevate public policy change through the lens of equity when it comes to gender and racial justice. Mayor Ginther. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Councilmember Shayla Favor. Councilmember Favor has served on Columbus City Council since 2019, and since that time, she has legislated unabashedly through an equity lens. And this includes her service as the chair of the Housing Committee, which crucially is a cornerstone of much that she'll be sharing with us here tonight. But in particular, Councilmember Favor has led the Housing for All legislative package, and that's going to be a key thing for you all to remember and to listen for in her remarks. That package, along with her efforts on council, works to strengthen homeownership, protect renters, expand affordable housing options. And also through her work as Affordable Housing Chair, she helped steer millions of American Rescue Plan dollars towards protecting families and renters in their homes. Councilmember Favor, welcome. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Shanita Seeley Jefferson. Dr. Seeley Jefferson is a social epidemiologist whose primary research seeks action to combat manifestations of structural racism that limit the human rights of Black families and communities. Dr. Seeley Jefferson is the founder, director, and principal investigator of the Social Epidemiology to Eliminate Disparities, or SEED Lab. Dr. Seeley Jefferson's scholar activism draws from the reproductive justice framework, which is a liberation framework founded by Black women, and seeks to inform future intervention studies, policy change, and social activism. And one thing that struck me in viewing the film and learning about Dr. Seeley Jefferson is this through line between activism and profession, and the way that these things are intertwined, really in leadership by Black women in our country, but really personified too by Dr. Seeley Jefferson. So, Dr. Seeley Jefferson. So nice to meet you. All right, well, welcome. We have much to explore tonight and to learn from the three of you. I really first want to take a little time to reflect on what we saw, because the theme of the film and the stories of the film were heavy. And we want to talk about Columbus, but first we want to, I think, draw some connections. So I would like to just ask broadly of all three of you to begin what elements of the theme what elements of the film really resonated most significantly from your seat here in Columbus?
You're the mayor.
I would say that, so I'm leading a research study in Detroit focused on court-ordered and illegal evictions. And I met over 1,000 women myself who have participated in my study. It's hard to see these stories. It's hard to hear about these stories and to see the negative impact on multiple generations of people. So we got kids, we got mothers, we have grandmothers. And no matter how many times I hear these stories, it always makes me sad. And I also feel furious because we don't have to live like this. This is inhumane. And so that's something that was very clearly demonstrated in this film. Also, it's not easy for me to see myself on screen, so that was also something that I saw it multiple times, and I'm still just like, oh no. But just the humanity of Black women and the strength of character of Black women and Black families is something that I think was clearly demonstrated in the film, and I want to just raise that up as something that we should all pay attention to.
You know, I think what I would offer, and good evening, everyone, Happy New Year, if we can still say that. If I kind of just go off where you left, it's the resiliency that Black women have to continue to personify despite the obstacles that should not be in their way. Housing is a human right. And unfortunately, if we look at the city of Columbus, as good as things have been for quite some time, we continue to unfortunately top the charts when it comes to subject matters like homelessness and evictions and infant mortality and maternal mortality. And why is that? It doesn't mean that we are any less educated. It doesn't indicate that we are less fortunate but perhaps we're less fortunate because only because some folks see the color of our skin as an hindrance. And so that is what's triggering for me. That's what resonates with me in the film, because it doesn't have to be this way. There are so many amazing people that work to solve some of the greatest problems that we are grappling with in our community, and this does not have to be Columbus's story.
Thank you.
I was thinking about, more Detroit-specific thoughts as I watched it. The fact this was a city of 3 million in the early 70s, was just under 1 million before the Great Recession. I think the population of Detroit dropped to less than half that. So in the midst of housing and neighborhoods literally abandoned and empty, they were still out of reach for African American women living there, born and raised there in these neighborhoods. And I think to the council member's point, I think what I came away with is the incredible resilience of these women who had had door after door after door slammed in their faces and rugs pulled out from under them, how they continued to focus on legacy. I must have heard the word legacy. I feel like I heard it 100 times in the film. And that they were going to persevere and they were going to continue moving forward, even if it was through hotel rooms and places on other people's couches, to be able to get that within their grasp, to pass on to their kids. It was powerful.
It was, and I think that's a really important point. One thing that struck me is when we think about the barriers that come with access to housing and dignified and safe housing, we have to make sure we're considering the concept of intersectionality, which Kimberly Crenshaw coined, and I think most of you are familiar with it, but to remind, there's an interconnected nature of various identity categories, such as race, class, and gender. Those are sort of commonly understood to be overlapping systems of discrimination or disadvantage. An additional identity that was so common in this film, it wasn't just race and gender, but also mothers, right? And when you talked about legacy, Mayor, it made me think that is a very important identity for folks who are hardest hit by the housing crisis. So can you talk a little bit more about how those factors impact the experience of individuals facing eviction? What are the other levers that are being pulled in these women's lives that are affecting? It's not just the eviction itself, but there are other factors about their identities that are then affecting that. Council member, I'll start with you.
So I talk a lot about the impacts of systemic racism. And, the way in which I have approached the work of the Housing Committee, now it's the Housing, Homelessness, and Building Committee, which all things work collectively together, in all honesty, but is through this lens of understanding that we don't have the pleasure of siloing this conversation off and just only talking about housing without also talking about the other systemic factors that contribute to these evictions, right? And so before we even get to the fact that Black women, and specifically Black women with families as head of households, are topping the charts in Columbus and Franklin County as it relates to evictions, we got to take a half step back and talk about, let's talk about Black women not being paid a fair living wage in our community, right? Not too long ago, we recognized the fact that Black women still are on the lowest totem pole as it relates to equal pay in the city of Columbus. And so if you're not even making a living wage, then how are you going to be able to pay the rent on your home? And so if we dig a little bit deeper, let's talk about folks who are on Section 8 or have housing vouchers, right? In the city of Columbus, without a shadow of a doubt, those numbers still resonate, unfortunately, with Black individuals. And so if you think about from a policy perspective, well, how can we combat that? Well, that's why we work to pass source of income discrimination, because there is the reality that housing discrimination based upon one's skin color is an absolute factor. Well, they're not just going to say no Black folks allowed. You can't do that anymore. But what you can do is say no Section 8 here, no housing vouchers here. And if disproportionately you have the folks who are housing voucher holders are Black individuals, well, that is discrimination, and it's contributing to the systemic impacts of it. And so then once someone has to go through the evictions, then you're in this world of instability and everything that comes from being in an unstable environment. And because you have kids, those kids are now in an unstable environment. They're not getting the proper education that they need. So that means that they're falling behind. That means that they're not going to graduate on time. They're not going to be able to get that job that they need or go to college. So it's this cycle that continues, right? And so it is incredibly important that we approach this work from a holistic approach in order to truly make a dent in our efforts to address the problem.
Thank you. Is there anything else that either Mayor or Dr. Celia Jefferson want to add when we're talking about policies that particularly when considering the multiple identities that Black mothers hold, how policies can help support the whole person?
One of the things that I'm trying to do with my work is document the magnitude and severity of court-ordered and illegal evictions. Because we know that about 40 to 50% of all evictions do not go through the courts, which means that they are illegal. And we don't have any evidence about how much this happens to Black women or their families, and also what it does to us mentally or physically. So Black women with children are more likely to be evicted from their homes than every other group in this country, and it's not because of eviction warranting behavior. So it's not because we don't pay rent. That's not the reason. What we're dealing with is racism and classism and discrimination against families and misogyny, specifically misogyny towards Black women. And one of the things that we've been advocating for is consequences for landlords who violate people's civil and human rights. So some accountability for landlords. We also need affordable housing. We also need, so this housing crisis is a economic issue. It's a environmental justice issue, as we've seen in the documentary. It's a reproductive justice issue. All of these things are related. So if we are going to have some solutions to this complicated problem, it's going to have to be a complicated solution. It's going to have to be multi-level. It's going to have to be multi-sector, multi-generational. So it's not going to be an individual level approach that's going to address this structural level issue.
And I want to highlight what you said about health, that we saw clearly, and we know the impacts that that traumatic stress have on health, and that passes from generation to generation. Can I ask you to add a little bit more about your reproductive justice framework when it comes to the issues of eviction?
Yeah, thank you. So reproductive justice is defined as the right to have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. Okay, this is a reproductive justice issue if there ever was one. Because so I'm also trying to show with my work the community level impact of eviction. So it's not just stressful when I am being evicted. It's also stressful when I see my neighbor's things on the curb, which actually is illegal in Detroit for landlords to throw your stuff out, but they do it all the time. So there's an ordinance that landlords have to have an eviction dumpster, and it has to be clean, and they have to put people's belongings in it and lock the thing before they leave. They never do that. So we need some enforcement. We need some accountability for these landlords. And we also saw in this documentary that some of the landlords don't even live in the United States, never they don't have any intention on living in the United States or coming to the United States. So what I'm seeing is a specific targeting of Black women who have children. And we have to document the impact of this on people's mental and physical health, and that's what we're trying to do. Because, like you said, stress is the pathway through which we know all of these adverse society-level factors are impacting people's health. And we live shorter, sicker lives than everybody. And that's not because of genetics. It's also not because of access to medical care. It's also not because of poor choices. Because we understand that the choices that people make are limited to the choices that they have. Some people don't have good choices, and then their health is negatively impacted because of that. But this is not about individual level failures. This is about the way our society is organized around structural racism and institutional racism and discrimination and like all of these things. And we have to, I'm committed to raising up our consciousness about the root causes of these issues. It's not individual level factors.
I wonder if we could also offer up, the mayor, one of his focuses has been around infant mortality, Celebrate One. And there was one of the reports, and one of the findings in the report, absolutely elaborated the connection between instability and housing and infant mortality, right? And so there is this notion that if you are not in safe, stable housing, that even before you're pregnant, it is putting you in harm's way of both the fetus not surviving or you not surviving in this. And so it is incredibly important for the City of Columbus, through the efforts of Celebrate One and other partnerships that we have been intentional about really working on, is with Root. We've done a great partnership with them over the last few years to really zero in on how can we serve the whole of an individual, recognizing that racism exists all across the board, and that if we are going to make sure that our babies are surviving, that our families are thriving, that we have to call these things out as they are, and then make sure that the dollars are there to support those efforts and to support the organizations that are uplifting this work every day. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think to Doc and Councilmember's points, yes, we can be very proud of the fact that since 2021 we've invested, I think, $95 million of emergency rental assistance to keep people, including women and children, in their homes, that we aggressively went out to right a wrong through our Court of Appeals decision, the inability to evict without the owner showing up to court, a huge win. We're investing $1.5 million every year, because we were an outlier in that. I think we might have been the only big city in the country where somebody could be evicted through an affidavit, which was critically important. We're investing $1.5 million every year through legal aid to make sure tenants have representation in legal guidance and advice in court. Those are all important things. But because of systemic racism and the challenges that women, and Black women in particular, face in this community and communities around the country, we have to address some of these larger issues. One of the issues here in our community is we have this huge supply crisis. We have fewer units coming to market, over 13 years, probably before the Great Recession. And if you go back to Econ 101 and you look at supply and demand, if your supply is flat and your community is growing, so we kind of have the opposite situation than Detroit has. Women and Black women, particularly if there's an eviction on the record, and we know Black women are more likely to have an eviction on their record than anyone else, they're forced into substandard housing that puts them and their families at risk. They're paying more for that substandard, unsafe housing because we do not have enough supply. And so this is where those arguments need to continue to be lifted up, that the way we protect everybody in this community as we grow is promoting and pushing for more types of housing of all types at all price points. Because what we've seen just in the last couple of years, you haven't seen anything yet. And you can look at high-growth cities around the country where African Americans and African American women can no longer afford to live. They're still going to work in those communities, but they're going to have to be on hour or two bus rides to and from jobs and opportunity. I mean, think about the last cop, firefighter, teacher, nurse, bus driver who works in San Francisco that lives anywhere near there. And now Austin and Denver and Charlotte and Atlanta. And so we know the challenge before us. And if we believe passionately that everybody that works here ought to be able to afford to live here, this is where we've got to address this supply crisis with these other changes and looking at it through that lens of equity for African American women in particular.
That's hugely important. I want to stay on this for a minute because it is very true that we are facing a housing crisis, but an opposite crisis to Detroit in many ways in our community that's growing. And you explained that very well. The economics of supply is this sort of thing that undergirds all the issues. And then underneath that is systemic racism. And then we've got this system built on top of it. So other than increasing supply, what are the other, I really open this up to anyone, what are the other, let's get nerdy here, what are the other policy instruments that are really important if we're building Columbus for today, we're building Columbus for 10 years from now, even 20, heck, right? Buildings last quite a long time. What are those policy instruments in addition to just creating more diverse stock?
You know, so let's be clear that there's no silver bullet, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how we always, well, that's how I always start this conversation because we cannot put all of our eggs in one basket and think that's going to be the solution for Columbus's housing crisis. But with that being said, 2022, we did a comprehensive overview of our tax incentive policy. Yes, it's the dirty word, abatements. Mm-hmm. But this is the reality of things, folks. Like, it does not cost any less to build something that is affordable versus something that is market rate. In fact, it could be a little bit more expensive to build something develop something that is actually deemed affordable. And so without subsidies that are in place, i.e. tax incentives, the housing bond, thank you all voters for voting for that $200 million housing bond, we're not going to have the type of development that we need. But it was the recognition that the policy wasn't going far enough. And so now in the city of Columbus, you're not going to be able to receive a tax incentive if there is not a true affordability built into that project. That is, it's life-changing, quite honestly, because what we were seeing in communities is truly this change, this gentrification that was occurring in communities. And I live on the Near East Side, saw it every day. A new owner gets a old dilapidated property, develops it, and then we've got new market rate, and it's got a 15-year tax incentive. But then you've got the first person that's been living in that community forever, and taxes are going up. And so something just doesn't make sense there. And so now, if that property has to be income qualified, so we're making sure that there's affordability built into the program. I know that it's a touchy subject, but once again, it's the understanding that we have got to get more units in the ground. It's also the acknowledgement that the longer that we are on this supply-demand issue here, we're always going to be on the losing side of this argument. And so we need more housing across the spectrum. We need to make sure that folks that can afford the market rate, that there's actually market rate units available for them. And then that takes the pressure off of those affordable units, that the folks that can actually afford a higher rent are not going to take those units that are absolutely being deemed affordable. Another initiative that we're piloting in the city of Columbus is this notion around accessory dwelling units. If you are not familiar, once again, on the Near East Side, we have a lot of carriage houses. Some folks call them mother-in-law suites, but units in the back. right? Once again, it's maximizing the space that is on a lot and providing an opportunity to provide additional housing in our community. And so we're going to keep trying new things in our community. But I want to also throw in here, as we're talking about this conversation around equity, we are facing strong NIMBYism in the city of Columbus, across the country. And so anytime we have projects that have been designated affordable, or maybe they are permanent supportive housing, or maybe they're units that could bring in some folks that truly do have mixed incomes, right? And because we fear what we don't know, there is this gut reaction to make sure that those people don't come into our community. And so I've been intentional about really creating this new movement around YIMBYism, yes in my backyard, because I believe there is absolutely more support out there for different types of housing, and we have to normalize that. We have to talk more about what folks in our community are experiencing, even those who are marginalized, and encourage folks like the ones in this room to show up and show out when there are controversial projects, and not really controversial, they're just controversial because they're deemed affordable, right? And so we have to push back on some of those notions, those dog whistles, if you will, that get folks really riled up as it relates to NIMBYism.
That's great.
I might add that history is important for us to understand if we're going to understand the current state of housing instability in Columbus and in the United States overall. So I would say something that I just would like to raise up is that we have to have some radical truth telling about how we got here. Wow. We also should do the work of like reconciliation across racial lines, across ethnic lines, across socioeconomic status lines. We need truth, we need reconciliation, and I would be remiss if I didn't say reparations. So some real conversation about repairing the harms that have been done over multiple hundreds of years for people who haven't had that, who've never had that. I mean, we have a 400-year history here, and only 14% of the history of Black people in this country is post-Civil Rights Act, and that happened less than 60 years ago now. So this is an important part of this conversation. This is a policy, this needs to come from the federal level, but this is a policy that we should have some real serious conversations about. We cannot move forward unless we understand where we've been. We also can't move forward with telling people, oh, just forget about that. That was a long time ago. No, people, do you know that the last widow of someone who was in the Tuskegee experiment just died in 2009? So like that wasn't that long ago. Somebody who was on the planet, her husband was in this experiment, which we talk about as like something that happened a very long time ago. Yeah. It wasn't that long ago. So I just want to raise up that truth, reconciliation, and reparations is an important part of this conversation.
I think to Doc's point, we heard a lot about redlining, and we've been doing the Redefine the Red Line exhibit in partnership and educating our community. We're in the midst of rewriting our zoning code for the first time in 70 years. And there is a direct correlation between redlining and the zoning code that's on the books for the city of Columbus that's 70 years old. You cannot deny that. There are connections everywhere. And so there's a reason the zoning code has not been rewritten in 70 years. This is going to be really, really hard. And this mayor may be a former mayor, and there may be council members who are former council members when we get done with this process, but we still have to do it. It is the right thing to do to not only acknowledge the past, but do course correction for the future for this community. And it has to be a code that embraces density and height, which we know are the two major contributors to affordability. This is going to be hard. And so for those of you here tonight who do not know about this zoning code rewrite, I ask you to get educated and engaged and involved and become an advocate and join this zone-in process because I think this is one way Columbus can tell the truth, be honest, acknowledge our responsibility, but most importantly, own the remedy. And this rewrite is a big part of it.
That's, thank you for saying that. And that is a critical long-term measure that can change the playing field in our future. And then I think about the work being done to increase supply, to make sure that supply is diverse, right? So it's not just housing for a single person, young professional making $45,000 a year, but for a parent making that amount of money. Those are crucial long-term goals. I want to then pull us back into the short term and go back to evictions. I know we talked about it when we started. Mayor, can you talk a little bit more about the issue of eviction court? The Columbus Women's Commission has done, and Councilmember Favor, please, and Dr. Celia Jefferson, all of you can answer as much as you want. But the Women's Commission in the city has led a great deal on trying to reform what happens in our eviction court because we have truly high numbers here. And I think it's the canary in the coal mine, right? I look at the eviction numbers and I look at the people that we serve in our homeless shelter as well. Canaries in the coal mine when it comes to what's out there happening in the market every single day that just might not be showing up on the steps of the shelter or of the courts. Dig into that a little bit, whoever wants to start.
I'll start and let the council member and Doc delve into it. The bottom line is this: if you believe that housing is the great vaccine, evictions are a clear and present danger to the overall health of this community. And there's a direct correlation, as the council member said before, between evictions and infant mortality, between evictions, or housing instability in safety and well-being of neighborhoods. And you could look at a variety of different stats index, whether it's, violence, infant mortality, academic achievement of local schools, public disorder in communities and neighborhoods that put families at risk. There is, a correlation between housing stability and all of those things. And so, as we think about our equity agenda and opportunity rising, that's why this issue of evictions is so important, why we've invested so many resources into keeping people in their homes over the last couple of years, changing the system, and providing representation to families facing eviction in the housing court. So it's something that we continue to have to focus on and try to get upstream, because I actually think it's going to get a little worse before it gets better, because the demand is so great right now that landlords know that if they get that person out that's paying $1,000 a month, they can easily raise that rent to $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 a month without doing a thing. Traditionally, when supply and demand is not so far out of whack, evictions cost landlords money. They weren't quite worth the effort, depending on this situation. And when you had legislative action and resources, forcing the hand of landlords, they were much more likely to figure it out. But because of our supply crisis, it's putting even more families at risk.
So what I would offer up, so we are taking strong steps at the City of Columbus, recognizing that this has to be a collective effort from the federal, state, and local, all working to address this issue. But with that being said, we are being cut off at the knees by the folks at the State House. When we think about what preemption looks like, measures that could be proactive in helping us address some of these issues. And so great example is the reality that one of the impacts or the effects of COVID-19 was this notion that we don't need to take that that $1,000 anymore when we can get $3,000. And that's not me being flip. Literally, we were seeing rents rise by the doubles and the triples in communities that were in developments that were traditionally for our low-income residents. And so very quickly, what we saw happen is a measure that was passed in the State House around rent control. And so what we hear all the time is, we can't afford to live in the city of Columbus anymore. City of Columbus, do something about it. Well, we can't, because the State House has preempted us from taking any type of measure that would be akin to being a rent control measure. And so in order to combat that, there's some legal aid folks in the House, some of the great partners that we have that have been working with us throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. The reality is that if you have representation in court, you are less likely to be evicted from your home. And so last year we passed $1.5 million to ensure that this notion of right to counsel exists and is available for folks in our community. To work in tandem with that policy, last November, we passed a pay-to-stay and third-party payer legislation. What this means is that because the City of Columbus has been great stewards with the federal dollars that we received, to the tune of $70 million-ish, I believe, Mayor.
Yep.
And we received more dollars that have been dispersed out to residents. There was resistance from landlords, some landlords, to receive said funds. And so even though the money was there, people were still being evicted from their homes. It doesn't make sense. If the money is legal, then what difference does it make, right? But we know that it does make a difference. And so now in the city of Columbus, if an entity, a third-party entity like Legal Aid Society or the Urban League or any other entity except for yourself pays the rent, you cannot be denied that opportunity to pay that rent. To add on to that, as long as you have not received an actual judgment, the landlord must accept that rent payment. And so that is the pay-to-stay legislation that was passed in tandem with that third-party payer. So once again, I hate to be on the reactive side of things, but that is government. But these are measures that were absolutely needed in order to really zero in on this notion as housing being a human right.
I might also just raise up the work of my colleague, Rakaya Yerby. She's leading a research project. She's at OSU in law. She's leading a project on the equitable enforcement of housing laws. So we know a lot of inequities exist in this space, and we also know that the majority of the evictions don't go through the legal system. So, like, what protections are there in place for tenants and for families? And so, I mean, this work is underway right now, so I would just plug it and say be on the lookout for her work, because we know that a lot of people who are facing housing instability caused by eviction have a lot of other material needs that aren't met. And I want to raise up also the work of the grassroots organizers and the community-based organizations that are doing the absolute most with the absolute least to provide mutual aid to people and to support women and families who are facing this violence. There's actually multiple violences that Black women are facing, but people and women are facing. So I just want to raise that up, that like when there are laws on the books, that's fine. Is there enforcement? Is there consequences for people who violate those laws other than a fine? And if they don't pay the fine, then what? Nothing. Usually nothing happens to these people, and they can just continue to violate people's civil and human rights with no consequences. So I just want to raise that up.
Thank you. And I want to stay there a moment with you. We have just a couple minutes left, so this is going to be sort of our last question. And we have we at YWCA, we run several leadership development programs, and one of our team members, Caroline Wolliver, describes our programs as sprinkling change agents throughout the community, right? The more we know about dismantling inequity and systemic racism, the more we can do. So that's what I would like to leave here with. Change agents in this room who are gonna go out and help fix what's wrong and help build a better system. So Dr. Celia Jefferson, can you, by way of giving advice to folks in the room, tell us about what you're seeing in community that's helping? What can we do? I'm gonna ask the same of the rest of the panel too.
One of the things that is coming out very strongly in the data so far of Secure Study is how much there is an information gap. So people just don't know the things that you would expect them to know based on their age or based on their family structure or whatever. So just simple like information sharing. Tell people your landlord actually cannot do that to you. Like that actually is illegal. You shouldn't accept it. And you can tell by some of the things that I've said, and even in this film, like I'm a rabble rouser. Like you don't have to take this. We do not accept this. This is a violation of our civil rights. We don't accept it. So I would say that giving people the information that they need in order to do what they need to do for themselves, because I tell my study participants, nobody's coming to save us. Okay, we are the cavalry. So I would leave this group with that same thing. We are the cavalry. We don't have to take this.
You know, that's a perfect segue to invite you all to go to housingforallcbus.com because I do believe that education, it's a deal breaker. Like when you know, you know. And so part of this notion of housing for all is not only this opportunity for us to house the legislation that's being passed, the efforts that the City of Columbus and City Council are doing to address housing, but it's to educate our residents. It's to empower you so that you know your rights, you know the responsibilities of your landlord, and I think that's incredibly important. What I would also offer up is that to the notion that no one is coming to save us, we all have a role to play in the dismantling of systems that seek to oppress us. And so we cannot sit this out. Yeah. We have to find a way to get involved in whatever way we are called to do it. And so whether it's through the work of the Columbus Women's Commission, or through the Y, or through creating documentary work, or using your social media platforms, it's incredibly important for you to educate yourself and then do something with what you have learned.
I guess I would challenge everybody to become a YIMBY.
Yes.
And to own this remedy. Black women did not create this system. They did not create the scenario and the scenes that we saw, the stories that we heard, not just in Detroit, but we hear in this city and cities around this country. It's our responsibility to acknowledge what's going on and to own the remedy. And we, to the council members' point, can't sit this out. And we have to own it and address it.
Well, I thank you very much. I'm walking away inspired and ready to stay in the fight. One of the things that I heard each of you say, if not explicitly, in the background of all of your words, is that housing is a human right. The women in the movie said this: housing is a human right. In this country, it is not treated as a human right. There's a cap on the number of people who can get it. And the system fails somebody every hour. So this is a fight for our generation. It truly is a civil rights fight for our generation. And thank you very much for being part of this discussion and the solution. Yeah, thank you.
you to everybody for coming today, staying. Thanks to all the panelists, Mayor especially, right? Coming out of the house. And to Liz Brown for moderating the panel. And no one's coming to save us. Got to do that ourselves. Thank you all.